Father Benedict opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been waiting for her. Sister Grace, punctual as always, please come in. She stepped over the threshold, and he closed the door behind her. She heard the lock click into place, that small, terrible sound that had preceded so much suffering for so many women. But this time would be different. Was Sister Grace walking into a trap she couldn't escape? Or was Father Benedict the one who'd finally met his match? The answer would unfold in the next hour, and nothing in St. Michael's Parish would ever be the same again. This is the story of the moment. A predator realized his prey had teeth, and the mask he'd worn for years began to crack right down the middle. But this story did not begin here. And before we dive into the full story, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story is traveling. Grab your popcorn because what you're about to hear will question everything you think you know about people. If you've done that, let's begin. To understand Sister Grace's journey, we must go back to where it all started. This is the story of a woman who walked into the devil's house with her eyes wide open, knowing full well she might never walk out the same. The bells of St. Michael's Parish rang softly over the dusty streets of Yaba, Lagos, calling the faithful to evening prayer. The sound drifted through open windows and over crumbling walls, a familiar melody that had marked time in this neighborhood for 30 years. To the people who lived here, those bells meant safety. They meant God was near. They meant Father Benedict was watching over them. And that was exactly the problem. Sister Grace stood at the window of the convent dormitory, watching the last light fade from the sky. She was new here, only 3 weeks since she'd been transferred from Ibadan, but already something felt wrong. She couldn't name it yet, couldn't point to it and say, there, that's the problem. It was more like a shadow at the edge of her vision, something that disappeared whenever she looked directly at it. But Sister Grace had learned long ago to trust her instincts. She turned away from the window and looked at the other nuns scattered around the small common room. Sister Kioma sat in the corner, her Bible open on her lap, but her eyes were unfocused and distant. Sister Patience was folding laundry with mechanical precision, her hands moving but her mind clearly somewhere else. Sister Ruth stood near the door, her arms wrapped around herself even though the evening was warm. They all looked like women carrying invisible weights. Sister Ruth, Grace called softly, "Are you all right?" Ruth's head snapped up, and for just a moment, raw fear flashed across her face before she smoothed it away with a smile. "Yes, of course, just tired. Long day." It was the kind of answer that said nothing while saying everything. Grace had heard that same hollow tone before, back in Ibadan, from a young woman who'd come to the church seeking help after her uncle had hurt her. That woman had worn the same forced smile, the same careful blankness in her eyes, the same way of holding her body like it didn't quite belong to her anymore. Recognition settled cold in Grace's stomach. "Father Benedict asked me to come to his house this evening," Ruth continued, her voice too bright, too practiced. "He wants to discuss my progress in the novitiate. He's very dedicated, you know, always making time for private spiritual guidance." The other nuns went very still. Kioma's fingers tightened on her Bible. Patience's hands paused mid-fold. The air in the room changed, becoming heavy with something unspoken. "That's kind of him," Grace said carefully, watching their faces. "Does he do that often, private meetings?" "Oh yes," Ruth said, and now her smile was brittle as glass. "He's very attentive to all of us, especially the younger sisters. He says we need extra guidance to resist temptation in this modern world." Something about the way she said attentive made Grace's skin crawl. "Well, don't let me keep you," Grace said. "But Ruth, if you ever need to talk about anything at all, I'm here." Ruth's smile faltered for just a second, and in that second Grace saw something that looked like hope quickly crushed and buried. "Thank you, sister, but everything is fine. Father Benedict is a holy man, everyone says so." She left before Grace could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. "Hey, my people, I need you to pause right here with me for a second because this story is about to take you somewhere deep, somewhere real, and I need to know if you're ready for this journey. If you're already feeling the tension building, drop a like right now. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe because this storytelling family is growing, and I want you to be part of it. We're just getting started, fam, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to Sister Grace, because what she was about to discover would make her question everything she thought she knew about faith, trust, and the men who hide monsters behind holy robes. Grace waited until the room emptied before she approached Sister Kioma, who was still sitting in the corner, staring at nothing. "Sister Kioma," Grace said gently, sitting down beside her, "how long have you been at this parish?" Kioma blinked slowly, as if coming back from somewhere far away. 4 years. "And Father Benedict, he's well respected. Everyone loves him. Kioma's voice was flat, emotionless. He's done so much for this community. He feeds the poor, counsels the troubled, prays for the sick. People call him a living saint. And what do you call him? Kioma's hands began to tremble. She pressed them flat against her Bible, trying to still them. I call him Father, like we're supposed to. Kioma, Grace reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, Grace covered those shaking hands with her own. What happened to you? For a long moment, Kioma said nothing. Then, so quietly Grace almost didn't hear, nothing I can prove. Tell me anyway. Kioma's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. He invites us, one at a time, always in the evening, always to his private house. He says it's for spiritual direction, for mentorship. He offers tea or juice, something he's prepared himself. He insists you drink it, says it's rude to refuse his hospitality. And then... She stopped, her breath coming faster. And then, Grace prompted, her heart pounding. And then you wake up, hours later, back in your own bed, and you can't remember how you got there, but your clothes are wrong or your body feels wrong, and there are moments, just fragments, hands, shadows, his voice telling you that no one would believe you. That you're confused, that you had too much to drink and imagine things. Kioma's voice cracked. You try to tell yourself it was a dream. You try to convince yourself nothing really happened. Because if something did happen, if he really... She couldn't finish it. Grace felt fury rising in her chest like a living thing. You reported him. We tried, Kioma laughed bitterly. Sister Ruth told Mother Superior last year. Mother Superior went to the bishop. The bishop said Father Benedict was a man of impeccable character, that the stress of religious life sometimes causes young women to have confused thoughts. They suggested Ruth take a leave of absence for her mental health. She came back 3 months later and never spoke of it again. How many? Grace asked. How many of you? Kioma finally met her eyes, and the pain Grace saw there was bottomless. How many sisters have been assigned here in the last 10 years? That's your answer. Grace stood up slowly, her mind racing. Around her, the convent walls suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like a cage. Outside, the church bells began to ring again, calling people to evening mass, and the sound that had once seemed holy now sounded like a warning. Or maybe a mockery. Because somewhere in the building next door, Father Benedict was preparing tea for Sister Ruth, and everyone in this parish would continue to call him a man of God. But Sister Grace had never been good at staying silent in the face of evil, even when that evil wore a collar and held a Bible. Especially then. She walked to the window and stared out at the priest's house, its warm lights glowing in the darkness like something innocent, like something safe. Was this really happening under the nose of an entire parish? Was one man's reputation really worth more than the souls and bodies of the women he was destroying? The answer was about to shake this parish to its very foundation. This is the story of the moment when silence became louder than screams, and one woman decided that sometimes the only way to expose a wolf is to walk straight into its den. Sister Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the convent, the creaking floors, the distant traffic from the street, the soft crying coming from someone's room down the hall. She couldn't tell whose room it was, but she didn't need to. She already knew the sound of grief that had nowhere to go. When morning came, she found Sister Ruth in the chapel, kneeling before the altar with her rosary clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Grace slid into the pew beside her and waited. Sometimes the most important conversations started with silence. After several minutes, Ruth whispered, "He gave me tea. Ginger tea," he said, "for my digestion." Her voice was hollow, scraped clean of emotion. "I only remember drinking half the cup. Then I woke up in my bed at 3 in the morning and my head was pounding and She stopped, swallowed hard. "I knew something had happened, I knew, but I couldn't remember. And that's worse, Sister Grace. Not knowing is worse than anything else." Grace felt her hands curl into fists. "Ruth, I believe you." Ruth's head snapped up, tears streaming down her face. "You do. Every word, and I'm going to help you." "No," Ruth grabbed Grace's arm, her grip desperate. "No, you can't. You don't understand what he is. He's not just a priest, he's their priest. This whole parish worships him." When Sister Patience tried to tell her own family what happened, her mother slapped her and called her a liar. Said she was trying to destroy a holy man's reputation because she couldn't handle her religious vows. Sister Patience hasn't spoken to her family in 2 years. "Then we don't go to the parish," Grace said firmly. "We don't go to the bishop, and we don't go to people whose faith in him is stronger than their faith in you. We will go somewhere else." "Where?" Ruth's voice cracked with a hope so fragile it hurt to hear. "Who would help us?" Grace thought of her younger brother, Marcus, who worked as a journalist in Lagos. Marcus, who'd always had a nose for injustice and a stubborn refusal to let powerful people hide behind their titles. Marcus, who told her once that the truth was the only thing worth fighting for, even when fighting for it cost you everything. "I know someone," Grace said. someone outside the church, someone who understands that evidence speaks louder than reputation. Ruth looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, something that looked like the first spark of courage after years of darkness. What do we do? First, we document everything. Every invitation he's made, every girl who has visited his house, every pattern we can establish. We talk to the others carefully, privately. We build a record of what he's done. And then, Grace's jaw tightened, and then we catch him in the act. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and danger. Ruth's eyes went wide. You mean? I mean that if he invites me for his so-called spiritual guidance, I'm going to accept. But I'm not going to drink whatever he offers. And I'm not going to go alone, even if he thinks I am. Sister Grace, he's dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of. Yes, I do. That's exactly why I have to do this. Grace took Ruth's trembling hands in hers. How many more girls, Ruth? How many more years? Someone has to stop him, and it's clear no one else is going to. Over the next week, Grace moved through the convent like a quiet storm, gathering pieces of a nightmare that had been hidden in plain sight for years. She talked to Sister Kioma, who revealed that Father Benedict always locked his front door during these meetings, a detail that seemed small until you understood what it meant. She spoke with Sister Patience, who still had the dress she'd worn that night, the one that had been buttoned wrong when she woke up, though she'd buttoned it correctly before drinking his wine. She listened to Sister Margaret, who was newer than Grace and had declined his first invitation, only to find herself suddenly assigned the worst duties in the parish, scrubbing toilets, working in the hot kitchen, being publicly corrected for minor mistakes during Mass. The pattern was clear: accept his invitation and be violated, refuse it and be punished, report it and be silenced. It was a perfect trap, designed by someone who understood that his position gave him not just access but immunity. But Father Benedict had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that all women who entered religious life were the same, meek, obedient, too afraid of authority to fight back. He'd never met someone like Sister Grace. Hey fam, if you're watching this and your heart is already racing, I need you to hit that like button right now, because this story is about to go somewhere that's going to have you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment and tell me what you think Grace should do. Would you have her courage? And subscribe to this channel, because we're building a family here that believes in truth, justice, and the kind of stories that actually matter. Now let's get back to it, because Father Benedict is about to make his move, and Sister Grace is about to show him that not every woman can be silenced. On the 8th day after her arrival, Father Benedict approached Grace after morning Mass. His smile was warm and practiced, his voice gentle as summer rain. Sister Grace, I've been hoping to speak with you. It's important for me to get to know all our new sisters personally, to understand your spiritual journey and how I can best support your growth in Christ. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and Grace had to force herself not to recoil. Would you join me this evening at my residence? I'll prepare some refreshments, and we can have a proper conversation about your calling. Grace met his eyes and saw nothing there but calculated warmth. This was a man who'd perfected the art of looking holy while plotting sin. This was a man who'd used God's name as a weapon and the church as his hunting ground. Of course, Father, she said, letting her voice carry just the right amount of honored nervousness. What time would you like me to come? 7 o'clock, don't be late. His smile widened. And sister, come alone. These spiritual discussions are quite personal, and I find they go better in private. I understand, Father. He walked away, already confident in his victory, already planning which drink he'd prepare, already anticipating another easy conquest. He had no idea that Sister Grace had spent the afternoon before calling her brother Marcus from the payphone 3 streets away. He had no idea that Marcus was already putting together a plan that involved people Father Benedict couldn't threaten or silence, people who dealt in evidence and facts, not faith and reputation. He had no idea that the dress Grace would wear that evening had a small recording device sewn into the collar, courtesy of Marcus's journalist friends, who'd helped expose corrupt politicians and crooked police officers. And he definitely had no idea that the tea Grace would pretend to drink had already been planned for, that she'd practiced the art of appearing dizzy while staying perfectly alert, that she knew exactly how to play the role of a weakening victim while her mind stayed sharp as glass. As sunset painted the Lagos sky in shades of orange and red, Sister Grace stood before the mirror in her small room and looked at her own reflection. She saw fear there. She wasn't foolish enough to pretend she wasn't afraid. But she also saw determination, fury, and something else that surprised her. Peace. Because finally, after years of watching evil hide behind holy words, someone was going to drag it into the light. She walked out of the convent at 6:55, her steps steady despite her racing heart. The priest's house sat just 50 meters from the church, close enough that people could see her entering, but far enough that they couldn't hear what happened inside. Father Benedict opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been watching for her. Sister Grace, punctual as always, please come in. She stepped over the threshold, and he closed the door behind her. She heard the lock click into place, that small, terrible sound that had preceded so much suffering for so many women. But this time would be different. Was Sister Grace walking into a trap she couldn't escape? Or was Father Benedict the one who'd finally met his match? The answer would unfold in the next hour, and nothing in St. Michael's Parish would ever be the same again. This is the story of the moment. A predator realized his prey had teeth, and the mask he'd worn for years began to crack right down the middle. Father Benedict's house smelled of incense and old books, a scent designed to feel holy and safe. The sitting room was modest but comfortable, with wooden chairs arranged around a small table, religious paintings on the walls, and a crucifix that seemed to watch from above the doorway. Everything about the space whispered, sanctuary. Everything was a lie. Please sit, Father Benedict said, gesturing to one of the chairs. His voice was smooth as oil, practiced in the art of putting people at ease. I'll prepare some tea. I have a special blend, chamomile and valerian root, very calming, perfect for evening reflection. Grace sat down, folding her hands in her lap like an obedient novice. That's very kind of you, Father. She watched him move to the small kitchen area, noting how he positioned himself so his back was to her, how his hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. He was humming a hymn under his breath, completely relaxed, completely certain of how this evening would unfold. He had no idea that 3 streets away, Marcus sat in a parked car with 2 people. A lawyer named Jennifer Okafor who specialized in cases against religious institutions, and a detective named David Menser who'd volunteered his time after hearing what this case was about. They were waiting for Grace's signal, a simple text message that would tell them it was time to move. Father Benedict returned with 2 cups of tea, steam rising from both. He handed one to Grace and kept one for himself, settling into the chair across from her with a satisfied smile. Now then, Sister Grace, tell me about your calling. What brought you to religious life? Grace wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling its heat against her palms. She lifted it toward her lips, watching him watch her, seeing the anticipation in his eyes. At the last second, she pretended to notice something on her habit and lowered the cup, using the movement to barely touch the liquid to her lips while tilting the cup so nothing actually entered her mouth. I've always felt drawn to serve God, she said, setting the cup down as if to gesture while she spoke. Even as a child, I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to something greater than myself. How noble. He took a sip of his own tea, never breaking eye contact. And have you found the transition to convent life difficult? Many young women struggle with the sacrifice it requires. It has its challenges, Grace admitted, reaching for her cup again. This time she brought it closer, letting a tiny drop touch her tongue before setting it down once more, as if distracted by her own thoughts. But I believe God gives us the strength to handle whatever He calls us to do. Indeed He does. Father Benedict's smile widened slightly. You know, sister, I've always believed that spiritual guidance must be intimate, personal. The relationship between a priest and those in his care should be one of complete trust and openness. There it was, the same language the other sisters had described, the subtle shifting from spiritual talk to something that felt wrong, the emphasis on intimate and trust, the groundwork being laid for something terrible. Grace forced herself to smile. That makes sense, Father. Trust is important. Drink your tea, sister. It's getting cold. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, delivered in that same gentle voice, but a command nonetheless. Grace lifted the cup and took what appeared to be a long drink, tilting her head back, letting the liquid touch her lips and tongue, but using her tongue to block most of it from going down her throat. It was a trick she'd practiced for 3 days straight with plain water, learning to make it look convincing while actually swallowing very little. The tea tasted bitter beneath the chamomile, bitter in a way that tea should never taste. She set the cup down, now half empty, and met his eyes. It's good, thank you. Father Benedict relaxed back into his chair, and Grace could almost see him counting in his head, calculating how long it would take for the drugs to work. Tell me, Sister Grace, have you ever struggled with impure thoughts? And there it was, the shift into inappropriate territory, the beginning of the psychological manipulation that would make his victims doubt themselves later, make them wonder if they'd somehow invited what he did to them. Grace pretended to blink slowly, as if her vision was starting to blur. I'm not sure what you mean, Father. It's natural, you know, the body has desires even when the spirit is willing. There's no shame in acknowledging them here in private where God and I are the only witnesses. He leaned forward slightly. You can be honest with me, sister. I'm here to absolve you, to guide you through these temptations. Grace let her head drop slightly as if she was struggling to hold it up. She slurred her words just a little. Father, I feel strange, dizzy. That's normal, the tea is very relaxing, just let yourself feel it, trust me. He stood up and moved closer. Why don't you lie down on the sofa, you'll feel better. Hey my people, I need you to pause with me right here, because what's about to happen next is going to blow your mind. If you're feeling that tension, that anger at what this man has been doing, hit that like button. Comment below and tell me you're ready for justice, and make sure you're subscribed because this family doesn't stay silent when evil thinks it's won. Now let's get back to this moment, because Father Benedict is about to learn that Sister Grace isn't like the others, and his world is about to come crashing down. Grace let him help her to the sofa, her body appearing limp and uncoordinated, her eyes half closed. Inside, her heart was hammering, but her mind was crystal clear. She felt him sit beside her, felt his hand on her shoulder, heard his voice drop to that terrible gentle whisper the other sisters had described. You're safe here, sister, just relax. This is all part of God's plan for you. His hand moved from her shoulder toward her collar, and Grace knew this was it. This was the moment where he would cross the line, where his actions would become undeniable and recorded. She let him lean closer, let him think she was unconscious, let him believe he'd won. And then, just as his hand reached her collar where the recording device was hidden, just as he whispered something vile about obedience and purity, Grace's eyes snapped open, clear, focused, completely alert. I'm not asleep, Father. Father Benedict froze. For one long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe, his hand still suspended in the air between them. Then confusion flickered across his face, followed by the first hint of fear. What, how are yous? Awake, Grace sat up, her movements steady and controlled. Because I didn't drink your tea, Father. Well, not enough of it to matter, but you know what I did. She reached into her collar and pulled out the small recording device, holding it up so he could see the tiny red light still blinking. I recorded everything, every word, every move, all of it. The color drained from Father Benedict's face. You can't, that's not. I was only trying to help you seemed distressed. Save it, Grace stood up, putting distance between them. I know what you did to Sister Ruth, to Sister Keoma, to Sister Patience, to all of them, and now I have proof. Father Benedict's expression changed in an instant, the gentle shepherd vanishing to reveal something cold and cruel beneath. Proof? Do you think anyone will believe you? I am Father Benedict. I've served this parish for 15 years. I've baptized their children, buried their dead, counseled their families. You're just a nun no one knows, making wild accusations against a respected priest. His voice turned sharp as a blade. Do you know what happened to the last girl who tried to accuse me? She was removed from service. They said she had mental problems. Where is she now, sister? Where? I don't know, Grace admitted, but I know where you're going to be. She pulled out her phone and sent the text message, now. Father Benedict lunged for her, but Grace was already moving, dodging around the coffee table, putting furniture between them. You stupid girl, he snarled, all pretense gone. Do you think this changes anything? I'll say you came here to seduce me, that you're unstable, that you planted that device to manufacture evidence. They'll believe me. They always believe me. Maybe they would have, Grace said, if I'd gone to the bishop or if I'd gone to the church. But I didn't, Father, I went somewhere else. There was a sharp knock at the door. Father Benedict's head whipped toward the sound, his eyes wide with something Grace had never seen there before, genuine fear. That'll be the police, Grace said quietly, along with a lawyer and a journalist, and you know what else? Sister Ruth is outside right now, and Sister Keoma, and Sister Patience, and every other woman you hurt who's finally found the courage to speak. They're all waiting to tell their stories. The knock came again, louder this time. Father Benedict, this is Detective Mensa. Open the door. Father Benedict looked at Grace, and for the first time she saw him as he really was. Not a holy man, not a shepherd, not even a particularly clever monster. Just a coward who'd used his position to hurt people weaker than himself, and who'd finally been caught. You've destroyed me, he whispered. No, Father. Grace walked to the door and unlocked it. You destroyed yourself. She opened the door to reveal Detective Mensa, Jennifer Okafor, Marcus, and behind them, standing in a group on the pathway, at least 7 nuns from the convent. Their faces were pale but determined, their eyes fixed on the man who'd hurt them. Father Benedict saw them and something broke inside him. He tried to run for the back door, but Detective Mensa was faster, crossing the room in 3 strides and pulling out his badge. Father Benedict, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective recited his rights, as Jennifer Okafor began documenting everything with her camera, as Marcus stood by to witness it all, Grace looked at the faces of her sisters, these women who'd been silenced for so long. And for the first time in years, she saw something other than fear in their eyes. What happened next would shake the foundations of St. Michael's Parish to its very core. But would the community believe these women, or would they rally to defend the man they'd loved? The answer would determine whether justice was truly possible, or whether some monsters were simply too beloved to ever face consequences. This is the story of what happens when the truth finally comes to light, and a community must choose between the comfortable lie they've believed for years and the painful reality they never wanted to see. The news spread through Yarba like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew that Father Benedict had been arrested. By noon, the entire parish was divided down the middle, and the battle lines had been drawn not with weapons but with words, accusations, and broken faith. Grace stood in the convent courtyard, watching a crowd gather outside the church gates. Some held signs that read "Justice for the Sisters" and "Believe Survivors." Others carried signs that said "Free Father Benedict" and false accusations against a holy man. The two groups were shouting at each other, their voices rising in anger and pain, and Grace felt the weight of what she'd set in motion pressing down on her shoulders. "They hate us," Sister Ruth whispered beside her. She was trembling, staring at the people who'd once smiled at her in the market, who now looked at her with suspicion and disgust. "Half the parish thinks we're liars trying to destroy a good man." "Let them think what they want," Sister Kioma said, but her voice shook. "We know the truth." "Knowing the truth and getting people to believe it are two different things," Sister Patience added quietly. She was watching an older woman in the crowd, her own mother, who stood on Father Benedict's side, holding a sign that called the accusations the devil's work. Grace's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Turn on the news, Channel 7 now." They rushed inside to the small television in the common room, and what Grace saw made her blood run cold. A reporter stood outside the police station, microphone in hand, and behind her was a crowd of Father Benedict's supporters, easily 200 people, maybe more. "The arrest of Father Benedict has sent shockwaves through this community," the reporter said. "Many parishioners have come forward to defend their priest, calling him a man of impeccable character who has dedicated his life to serving the poor and marginalized. They believe these accusations are part of a coordinated attack against the Catholic Church." The camera panned to show an older man Grace recognized, Mr. Adami, one of the church's most prominent members. "Father Benedict saved my marriage," he said passionately. "He counseled my wife and me when we were ready to divorce. He baptized my grandchildren. This man is a saint, and these accusations are nothing but lies from confused young women who don't understand the sacred nature of spiritual guidance." "Confused," Ruth's voice broke. "Confused." The reporter continued. "However, the accuser's legal team has released a statement saying they have substantial evidence, including testimony from multiple victims and recordings made during an attempted assault. They're calling for a full investigation into Father Benedict's conduct over the past 15 years. The screen cut to Jennifer Okafor standing outside her law office, her expression firm and professional. "My clients are 7 brave women who have suffered in silence for years because they believed, correctly, that no one would listen to them. But silence protects predators, not victims. We have evidence, we have patterns, we have testimony, and we will see justice done, regardless of how beloved this man thinks he is." Grace felt something shift in her chest, a mixture of pride and terror. This was real now. This was public, and there was no going back. The next few days were a nightmare of a different kind. Grace and the other sisters who'd come forward were called to the police station repeatedly to give statements. They sat in sterile rooms and recounted their trauma to detectives who typed everything into computers, their faces carefully neutral. They handed over evidence, the dress Sister Patience had kept, the journal where Sister Kioma had written fragmented memories, the recording Grace had made. But outside those rooms, the world was tearing itself apart over their testimony. The bishop issued a statement calling for patience and due process, but Grace could read between the lines. He was distancing himself, preparing to claim ignorance if Father Benedict was found guilty, preparing to defend the church if he wasn't. Social media exploded with opinions. Some people praised the sisters' courage. Others called them attention seekers, liars, women who'd failed at religious life and wanted someone to blame. The comments were vicious, and Grace learned quickly not to read them, but she knew the others who were reading them were letting those cruel words sink into their hearts like poison. "Hey fam, I need you to stay with me because this is where it gets real. This is where we see what justice actually looks like when you're fighting against an entire system that wants to protect itself. If this story is moving you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling these survivors they're not alone. Subscribe to this family because we stand for truth even when truth is painful. Now let's get back to it because the trial is about to begin, and what happens next will determine everything." 3 weeks after the arrest, the preliminary hearing began. Grace sat in the courtroom gallery with her sisters, her brother Marcus beside her for support. Across the aisle sat Father Benedict's supporters, dozens of them, all watching the proceedings with hostile eyes. Father Benedict entered wearing a simple suit instead of his clerical collar, but he'd grown a beard that made him look more holy, more persecuted, more like a martyr. His lawyer was a sharp-suited man named Mr. Okonkwo who'd made his reputation defending powerful people accused of terrible things. Jennifer Okafor stood to present the evidence. She laid it out methodically, 7 women, all with similar stories, all describing the same pattern of behavior: invitations to his home, drinks prepared privately, loss of consciousness, fragmented memories, threats when they tried to speak up. She played the recording Grace had made. The courtroom fell silent as Father Benedict's voice filled the space, gentle and horrible, talking about trust and intimacy and God's plan, while his intentions were clear to anyone willing to hear them. But Mr. Okonkwo was good at his job. He stood up and painted a different picture. These are young women living in close quarters, sharing stories, influencing each other. They've convinced themselves that innocent pastoral care was something sinister. And this recording, he gestured dismissively, it shows a priest concerned about a sister who appeared to be having a medical episode. His words about trust and God's plan are being deliberately misinterpreted. What about the drugs found in the tea? Jennifer countered. Father Benedict has already explained that he uses herbal supplements for his own anxiety and insomnia. Sister Grace must have accidentally taken his cup instead of hers. A simple mistake, blown out of proportion. It was masterful. He was taking every piece of evidence and twisting it just enough to create doubt. The preliminary hearing lasted 3 days. Witnesses were called. Father Benedict's character witnesses painted him as a devoted servant of God who'd been falsely accused. The sisters told their stories, their voices shaking but steady, and Grace watched the judge's face, trying to read whether he believed them. On the 3rd day, the judge announced his decision. Based on the evidence presented, there is sufficient cause to proceed to trial. The defendant will remain in custody pending the trial date. The courtroom erupted. Father Benedict's supporters shouted in outrage. The sisters held each other and cried with relief. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was something. It was the system saying their testimony mattered enough to be heard. But as they left the courthouse, Grace saw something that made her heart sink. Television cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions, and in the crowd, angry faces, people who looked at her and her sisters like they were the criminals, like they were the ones who'd committed a sin by speaking truth. Sister Ruth grabbed her arm, her face pale. Grace, look. Grace followed her gaze and saw a group of young women standing apart from the main crowd. They looked nervous, scared, but determined. One of them stepped forward, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, wearing a university sweatshirt. Sister Grace, she called out, can we talk to you privately? They found a quiet cafe 3 blocks away. The young woman introduced herself as Blessing, and the others, 4 more young women, sat close together like they needed each other's courage to speak. We saw the news, Blessing said quietly. We heard what Father Benedict did to you, and we need to tell you something. He didn't just hurt nuns. Grace felt ice spread through her veins. What do you mean? He ran a youth program for troubled girls from broken homes. I was in that program 5 years ago when I was 15. Blessing's hands were shaking around her coffee cup. He said he wanted to mentor me privately to help me deal with my trauma from my abusive stepfather. He invited me to his house. He gave me juice, and then she stopped, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was crazy. I thought I'd imagined it. I was just a kid, and he was Father Benedict, and who would believe me? The other girls nodded, each with their own similar story. Each one had been alone, each one had been silent, each one had thought they were the only victim. Until now. Grace looked at Jennifer Okafor, who'd come with them. The lawyer's expression was grim but determined. This changes everything. If he's been targeting minors, if he's been using his youth programs as hunting grounds. We can prove he's not just a predator, Grace finished. We can prove he's been doing this systematically, to anyone vulnerable enough to be in his reach. Sister Ruth looked at Blessing and her friends with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't stop him sooner. We should have been louder, we should have fought harder. You're fighting now, Blessing interrupted. You're speaking up now, and that means we can too. As they sat together in that cafe, victims becoming survivors becoming warriors, Grace realized something profound. This wasn't just about Father Benedict anymore. This was about every time silence was chosen over justice. This was about every time a man's reputation mattered more than a woman's pain. This was about breaking a cycle that had been perpetuated for generations. But would it be enough? Would 9 testimonies be more convincing than one man's holy reputation? The trial was set to begin in 2 weeks, and the entire nation was watching to see whether justice was truly blind, or whether some people really were too powerful, too beloved, too sacred to ever face the consequences of their sins. If you enjoyed the first part of this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notification bell, so when part 2 drops you'll be the first to know. And hey, drop a comment below and tell me what country you're watching from. Let's see how far this tale is traveling across the world. Thank for watching. See you in the next video.